I'd like to just pick up on something that Dasha said earlier, which I think could also be something that we could ping pong around. Unless, Dasha, you have something you'd like to respond to that Elisa said. So you talked about you both kind of talked about individual differences, but in very subtle ways. I think, Elise, you mentioned that babies might have this connection, but that as we grow up, we might not. And that there might be people who lose it and people who don't lose it. And Dash, I think a lot of the work that you do, whether it started on your PhD work on sexuality or, things that we're doing together now, that individual differences is really critical to everything that you do. So let's try with this one to see whether we can get you two to ping pong against each other or with each other on this concept of individual differences. So maybe Dasha, what do you think when I say individual differences and touch? What's some of the first things that come to mind?
Habits. So I think about it as habits, and I think that's also a relatively recent development. And I mean, like recent as in post-COVID for me, because until COVID, I thought that, okay, you're either a touchy or not, right? In marketing, there are also these concepts that are measuring like need for touch by Joan Pack that assume that need for touch and it's more touching objects, but still that it's like a trait thing. And just some people are more processing through touch than others. And then NLP, there's also neurolinguistic programming. There's also this idea that some people are like visual and some people are audio and some people are kinesthets, right? So there's a lot of scientific literature that talks about like this trait, stable over time individual differences. But actually, my experience through COVID and after COVID showed that, well, and also my experience moving countries showed that, well, actually, we change. And now, for example, if, well, again, before the war, right? But when I would go back to Ukraine, and I would suddenly feel that people are way too close for me and touch me way too much. And although that used to be normal for me, right? So these things change. And we just had another Dutch Touch meeting like last week, a week ago. And we had this conversation with several haptotherapists, how COVID reshaped the norms of touch, right? And how now things that used to be like very, so we always kiss twice, right, when we meet, or we always shake hands, or this is how we interact, right? As a society, as a culture, for example, as a Dutch culture, now became negotiable. And then suddenly people started changing and shifting and exploring and renegotiating this consent. And it turns out that, well, there's actually a variety of responses that you might like as an individual, and that maybe with some people you are touchy and with some you're not, and maybe when you're tired you're less touchy or more touchy, right? So that there's quite a continuum. So uh, I guess the bottom line is that by now I'm fairly convinced that intra-individual differences, so like the variation within your day or year or decades of your life, is like actually way larger than in between people differences. Yeah.
Do
But of
you?
course,
Sorry.
there is probably some kind of stability, right? But I think I definitely used to overestimate it. Let's put it that way.
So I love this idea of habits. So maybe, Elise, you can say, what do you think about individual differences when you think about either the rational view of the world that you have versus maybe the practitioner view you have of the world, and maybe you can think about incorporating this idea of habits into what you have to say.
Yeah, so I like the idea. Um, I really like indeed what we saw that these social interactions or touch can change, right? It was really common before COVID that everyone would kiss on the cheek 3 times in the Netherlands. Also, people you don't really know, which was actually kind of weird sometimes because you didn't want to do that. And it's actually also a habit that isn't really, it didn't really come back. I feel in my environment, we now have different ways to greet each other um, than always this negotiated 3 kisses on the cheeks. So I love the idea of flexibility. And the thing that comes to mind for me is more attachment style. And so that is also what I work with in my practice. And you could see that sort of as a habit, but also one that can change, right? So I often go back to a person's youth, right? How did your parents interact with you? Were you touched? Were you loved? Were you confirmed in who you were, or were you disconfirmed? Right? Were there things that you were really happy about something, and then your parents would say, "Now, just act normal," or when you're really angry about something because your favorite toy broke, and then your parents would say, "We are not angry in this family. Stop it right now." Right? These are all signs of safety or unsafety, which a child learns. How safe is it to be connected to my feelings? How safe is it to express myself through feeling? And I think one's most intimate qualities, who you are in essence, is very vulnerable. And when you express that, that is expressed through feelings. And when that is not positively confirmed, then it becomes unsafe. So you lock it, right? You create a mask. You create someone else in front of you. So you create a person, or you shut down, close your heart, right? So you're not so hurt anymore. And I think that's when, and as I also see it, so this head thing versus body thing, I think dependent on the person, a person is using his or her talents to cope with the unsafe environment. And if it's intelligence that is a talent of a person, then the mind is a much more safer place than the body. So so you can start arguing, or sort of have the conversation a bit outside of yourself, so that your vulnerable self is not so much into the contact with the other person, because that part can be hurt and wasn't that confirmed so much. So this is where I go back to, and then the part of therapy is to signal safety again for feelings, for one's inner being, the person that he or she really is, and that he or she can really express that through feeling. And as a therapist, I sort of then give the confirmation, the parental affirmation, I think is the right word, affirmation, that could signal safety again for this person to connect again to his true self and express it, and then also bring it into contact with other persons. And that then can help have healthy relationships, right? Set boundaries, because really one's inner self, true self, is it's safe enough to bring that into the conversation.
So I think, Dasha, I would love to hear if you have a response to what we've just heard from Elise. And in particular, I felt that there were two really interesting things. One was that there are these individual different intra-individual differences depending on their gifts and whether they approach the world more from the the upper part or their whole body. But I also want to see whether you have a response, because what I heard Elise say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that maybe some of this intra-individual variation that you're seeing post-COVID is just that they can be more true to the way they'd like to interact through touch rather than perform according to norms. So I'd just be curious to know whether, and this maybe is then something we can talk about as empirical scientists trying to tap into measuring people's touch preferences. There are these layers. There's the touch that I do that I'm allowed to do, and then there are my actual preferences. So there were three things in there. You're welcome to tackle them in any order, Dasha, but I'd love to hear like a response to Elise there.
So I love the idea of layers, and I don't think anything of what Elise said contradicts how I see the world, right? So, um, yeah. So there are different, like we all carry luggage, and I think that's what Elise you were talking about a lot, like the childhood luggage, right? Whether these we call them habits or whatever we call it, right? But like some kind of like body language that we carry from our family, and that definitely shapes how we interact with the world. And at the same time, right, that with that luggage, we interact with the environment. And the environment can feel safe or not safe. And that's in fact what Elise is doing, right? She's creating a safe environment where that luggage can take a different shape, right? So by the same token, we also interacted lots of people outside therapy, right? And what I've been observing, like in the touch labs, right, and is that that luggage still takes very different shape depending on with whom and why and where you interact. So yes, this luggage, so these inter-individual differences are there, of course, but also the way they express can really vary. And also, again, over repetition, like if you have a lot of experiences of safe touch, then that maybe that luggage starts taking a different shape. And yeah, and I think my point was that, well, what COVID did is that reshaped this luggage for some people. And for many, it was actually given permission not to touch when they didn't want to, because also expression, right, is not only doing something when you feel like it, but also not doing something when you don't feel like it, right? And so, yeah. So perhaps to some people, COVID gave this freedom. To some people, it maybe made them realize so that this idea of skin hunger, right, emerged in societal discourse, right? Because some people realized, well, I'm actually craving touch, and some people thought, oh, thank God, I never have to do this horrible kisses again, right? So it just, I think what it created is it created a question mark, right? So it forced people to reflect on like, how do I actually prefer to interact, right? Or like, what are the other options of interactions?